Welcome to the Cult of Domesticity podcast, a podcast about history, true crime, and whatever life brings us. I'm Courtney, and every week I am joined by another fascinating person. Let's see what we're going to talk about this week.
Welcome back, devotees. We're back again with Bernadette from Murderific.
Hi.
And you got a taste last week of how her episodes are. Well, fabulous, obviously, but this week we're going to be discussing World War II historical event that you might have not heard of.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I didn't hear about it until I was watching The Daily Show, and the author of this book came on, and I was like, that sounds fascinating. And as some people know, I'm not a fan of researching World War II, just because it's so saturated, and the answer always seems to be Nazis.
It's always Nazis.
It's always Nazis.
They did it all.
Yeah, I had a friend in grad school who was researching socialist, like these smaller parties in interwar Germany, and he basically would start every presentation. So this isn't about Nazis.
Everyone leaves.
Yeah. Well, the best one was it was a hodgepodge, like just a whole graduate school one. So it was like someone did butterflies, and then it was like him, and everyone dies. Like in his story, everyone's dead because of Nazis, but still, and they're fighting each other in the street. But it was just like he had to be like basically like, it's not about Nazis. We're not focusing on them.
Mm-hmm.
And this story is also not focusing on Nazis. It's focusing on Dutch New Guinea. Which, have you ever been to Dutch New Guinea?
I have not. I've been to a few places, but not there.
It seemed nice. As we'll see. So we're going to start in January 1944. Let's rewind. Everything's in black and white. We all have fun hairdos. I'm assuming. I probably still wouldn't. But Margaret Hastings walks into a recruiting station near Birmingham, and she would get placed on the U.S. military compound in Dutch New Guinea. And she was a WAC, which is the Women Officer Corps. Basically, that's how women could serve besides, being nurses, because patriarchy.
So I read that she went into the military because she was 30 years old and was considered a spinster. So she had to do something with her life and went into the military.
Yeah, and a lot of the descriptions of her are that she was very beautiful. And I mean, she's a beautiful woman. Mm-hmm. So she was going on dates left and right, having a great old time.
Yeah.
But a lot of the WACs were unmarried older women. And some of them were widowers or just wanted to serve their country, which is really admirable because it didn't sound like they got to do a lot besides being secretaries still.
Right. Or a nurse.
Or just random jobs that they didn't think men would want to do. And then so from 1944 to the day that we're going to focus on, it's May 13th, 1945. So we're getting close to the end of the war. It's Base G, a sprawling U.S. military installation built around the town of Hollandia, because it's Dutch New Guinea. So we have to have something related to Holland. Margaret gets to her desk at 8 o'clock where she did paperwork, and she said it proved that war wasn't just hell. It was hell with paperwork. So just so you know, bureaucracy at work. She's described as 30 years old, lithe, and beautiful. So this comes up a lot in the book, and it's just because everyone, like the natives, the people in the plains, the journalists, all are very centered on that factor of her beauty.
Yeah, what if you don't have that going for you? You've got nothing.
Well, we'll see at some point. She didn't look so hot.
Yeah.
So this is 5 years from to the day that Winston Churchill uttered the phrase to rouse his countrymen to fight ahead. So, we will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them everywhere. I don't remember the rest of it. And I'm not going to try to do more Churchill than that. And the news in the Pacific is starting to turn around. Like, there's bombings in China, which, funny enough, is where my grandfather fought, believe it or not. We did fight in China, guys.
Wow.
And we're taking back the Philippines and all of that. And they're starting to do the island hopping technique to get to Japan. So, on that day, there was more than 130 U.S. fighters and bombers attacking troops, trains, bridges, and other Japanese targets of opportunities in southern and eastern China. And the event we're going to focus on that escapes most people's notice when you're going back is a C-47 transport plane carrying 24 officers, soldiers, and WACs that disappears in the mountainous jungles of New Guinea. So we have a mystery on our hands, which the author has kindly solved for us. So in case you're trying to picture like on a map, because Americans, let's not lie, we're not the best with maps.
Yeah, I was just trying to think where New Guinea was.
So it's located between Australia and the equator. So their nearest big body of things is Australia. And it's a largely uncharted tropical island, twice the size of California. And it's 1,500 miles long, nearly 500 miles wide at the center. And it's the world's second largest island. Do you want to know what the first one is?
Iceland? Greenland?
Greenland.
Okay. Oh, speaking of New Guinea, I just saw today, I was looking like who listens to Murderific, and New Guinea was like 0.1%. I have like 3 listeners in New Guinea. So thanks.
They'll be very excited for this episode.
Yes.
So the book I'm pulling this from, Lost in Shangri-La, the author describes New Guinea as, quote, resembles a prehistoric bird taking off from Australia or a comedian's rubber chicken, unquote. So that's the look of the island.
Okay.
It's sort of an inhospitable jumble box of environments too, which is good because there's a lost plane. Who else is going to be on this plane? Well, Margaret brings her regular double date partner, a pretty brunette named Laura Beasley. So you got these 2 girls, and because propriety, you can't go on your own, even though they're 30.
Yeah. Yeah.
How dare you go on a date without a chaperone?
It looks bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and these are just 2 of the several hundred WACs assigned to the Far East Service Command, basically supply, logistics, and maintenance for an outfit known as PF, military abbreviations. Margaret's a secretary. Her commanding officer who organizes this trip is Colonel Peter J. Prosson, an experienced pilot and BS chief of maintenance. So they have a pretty important job if you think about it, even as secretaries, because maintenance and logistics and supplies.
Yeah.
You're on an island with planes, and it's a tropical island, so moisture. Everything's moist, and so everything's gonna mold.
Yeah.
And how are you gonna get food? Crossan seemed like a good boss because he would have pilots bring in supplies, like treats for his staff, like Coca-Cola syrup, fresh fruit. And lately, he's been offering even better, like, perks, sightseeing tours of the coastline. I can talk, I promise. And Margaret actually wrote back to her father about these tours. Like, she's like, it's so amazing. My boss is letting, like, because think of any Pacific tropical island you've seen. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Or any boss even offering something like that would be amazing.
I know. Like, even being like, hey, we're going to go do, like, I don't know, I'm in Cincinnati. We're going to go do a riverboat tour. So we're going to go up and down the Ohio River.
Yeah.
Probably not now. It's flooding, but still. So that day, Crossan arranged the most rare and sought-after trip for his staff. He's trying to boost morale. A trip to Shangri-La, which does not sound like it belongs there.
Right.
It's New Guinea. So what is Shangri-La? A year earlier, in May 1944, Colonel Ray T. Elsmore heard his co-pilot's voice crackle through the intercom of their C-60 transport plane. They're flying around the center part of New Guinea, and his co-pilot Major Myron Grimes basically says he has seen this valley, and it's a hidden valley. It's really hard to get to because of the way the mountains are, and it's really dangerous because anyone who's heard a lot of plane accidents or anything like that, people flying in the mountains. Mountains create updrafts and downdrafts, and so sometimes it could be fine, and all of a sudden there's a gust of wind going straight up, and your plane's shit out of luck. Well, the story of this valley that has a native population that hasn't been seen by humans before, so naturally everyone's like, let's go look.
Yeah, I would want to go. I'd go now.
Become very popular. So people are clamoring to get these flights, and it's hard to get people who are certified to fly there. They have stories of natives firing arrows and throwing spears at planes, and some people are like, we want to go touch down there because, we're inheritors of Europeans, so we want to put our flag in it.
Yeah, we want to take your shit.
pretty much. Elsmore, who keeps going, is writing descriptions, but of course it's the 40s, so we have some racial and cultural condescension of the natives just in descriptions. So just assume that's throughout. They also bring 2 reporters, George Late and Harry Patterson, on the tour to it's the war. You need some feel-good stories, not just bring out your dead.
Sorry, not just Nazis and death.
Yeah, just not Nazis and death. So the reporters were like, okay, we need a better name. We need to brand this. And there was a movie that had come out called Shangri-La. So they're like, we're taking that and we're christening this valley Shangri-La. And it took hold. They formed a Shangri-La Society for pilots and passengers who flew over it. I just love how 40s this is. Each society member would receive a comically ornate certificate on a parchment paper that looked like a hard-earned diploma, complete with a blue and yellow ribbon, affixed with a gold foil seal.
I feel like they were very easily amused back then.
I mean, if you're stuck in the jungle for so long, wouldn't you be?
Yeah.
So the certificates were also personalized with the society member's name and the date of their flight, and they also included the precise longitude and longitude so they could find their way back, easier. But our two pilots on the day of May 13th were first-time flyers to Shangri-La. This can't go wrong.
No! Come on.
It's Crossan and his co-pilot Nicholson, and they knew all about the treacherous mountain pass from what they had heard or read from other pilots, and Crossan kind of gets up as they're flying, leaving the most difficult part to the co-pilot, who hadn't been flying more than a couple of years. So, that part. He also has disregarded Elsmore's warning about flying into Shangri-La. Elson has done now hundreds of flights into those valleys over the year. And Elson remarked on the dangers that would confront a pilot unfamiliar with this canyon. Because, like I said, airflow. There's just, it's misty because it's tropical and all that. If you've watched Below Deck, their most current season, they're in Tahiti, and you just look and all of a sudden out of nowhere, storms will come up, and that's just, you're in a tropical area. It's just what happens.
So they were warned a little bit?
Yeah, it was well known that it's a difficult flight in.
Yeah.
So, they're nearly an hour into the flight, and they're playing the Gremlin Special, which I just love the name of that.
Yeah.
Sneaked over a ridge, dropped several hundred feet, entered a narrow valley, which is an offshoot of the main valley entrance. So they're right there, almost. The plane flew at about 6,500 feet above sea level, and they're only about 1,300 feet above the valley floor, which is reasonable, I think, for if you want to see stuff on the ground and all of that. But if you don't know where you're going, on top of it, jungle-covered mountains flanked the Gremlin Special on both sides. So just setting the scene. There's mountains everywhere, covered with jungle. And Nicholson eases the control wheels forward, lowering the tail. So the tail rose, and then so they're going down a little bit more. They're going to go get closer to sea. He's 1,000 feet above the valley floor and continues dropping. This seems problematic. As you're reading it, you're until they were flying at less than 400 feet above the ground.
Oh no. Yeah, not good.
So John McCullum was one of the officers on the flight, and he's actually sitting next to Margaret, and he looks towards the cockpit, and he sees dead clouds ahead, which isn't good if you're in a valley. McCullum estimates this mountain to be about 13,000 feet, and I love this description, quote, "In the parlance of pilots, the cloud had a rock in it," end quote.
What? Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah. So McCullum realizes what's happened, and he says, quote, "Give her the gun and let's get out of here," end quote. He shouted at the cockpit. And, some of the passengers think it's a joke, but Nicholson already knew it was no joke, and he recognized the risk because McCullum's also a pilot, and he knew the first rule of mountain flying, which was always to be in a position to turn. But the problem was it's a valley, so it's too narrow for them to turn, so they can't do anything. There's only one option, up the mountain. And Nicholson pulls sharply back, just trying to get as much elevation as he can. Colonel Crossan is standing in the radio compartment, and Sergeant Helen Kent is enjoying the view from the pilot seat. So
she's just like, doo-doo-doo.
Yeah, she wanted a better view. So Crossan gave her his seat. But the problem is, he's the most experienced pilot on that plane, and he's not at the controls.
Wow.
And they're climbing. He's struggling to gain altitude. And McCullum's trying to see, spinning around, looking out his window to try to see what's going on. The branches begin to get closer to the bottom of the plane. And the pilot now can't really see because there are clouds. And he has no aid because he's basically only relying on his instruments. So he's plane blind. and basically going off of instinct. So it's terrifying. Sorry, my sister was calling.
So they're just going up now and like praying and not even knowing what's going to happen, pretty much.
Well, half of them don't realize what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, like half of them are praying, half of them don't realize what's happening. So it's not great. And the account what happens next comes from John McCollum. And he said it appears that Nicholson, who had only learned to fly 3 years earlier, grew momentarily disoriented or misjudged the situation when he flew into the low valley. The threat to the Gremlin Special might have been exaggerated by conditions beyond his control. But as he fought to gain altitude, powerful gusts of wind swept down, because again, mountain, the air has to go up and then come back down, so it makes weird drafts, and creating turbulence. So another reason why these air changes happen is because you have, in the bottom of the valley, it's been very warm, and up at the top of the mountains, it's chilly, so you have drastic drops in temperature, also making basically a wind shitstorm, I'm going to say, because you have to be on your toes and ready for any kind of condition. On top of it, this also formed cumulus clouds around the peaks in mid-afternoon, which is kind of when they're flying. They get hit by a downdraft at that moment and really hurt Nicholson's attempts to go up, like gain altitude. Nicholson can't make the plane bend to his wishes. It only has so much power, because remember, 1940s planes. And the Gremlin Special begins to shear off the tops of tropical evergreens, and basically the bottom of the plane starts getting beat up. The crazy thing is, even if Rawson had realized what would happen, there is no time to race back to his seat and take over control. Because one, there's someone else there, and two, it's already too late.
It seems like he should not have given up his seat, number one. Number two, it seems like they weren't, maybe they didn't think it was a big deal. That's what it seems like, and they just should have been more concerned about the flight.
Yeah, it seems like it was just for fun. It's just for fun. We're gonna go. It's gonna be fine. And it's not fine. So at that point, Margaret is still calm. She's like, she thinks her boss is at the wheel. So she's like, oh, he's doing some fancy stuff for us, like trying to keep us, like, boost that morale. As soon as he buzzing the treetop is flying flat on deck. But she's next to John McCollum, and he grabs her arm and goes, this is going to be darn close, but I think we can get over it.
Oh.
They do not get over it. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Sunday, May 13th, 1945, George Nicholson's desperate attempt to gain altitude ended. The distance between the C-4 and the train became 0. They crash into the mountain, into the trees. The cabin crumbles towards the cockpit, so the cockpit just starts crushing inward. The crazy thing is the walls of the fuselage collapse and is sucked inward. Both wings are ripped away. The tail section is snapped off like a balsa wood toy. And then there's flame, because fuel sparking.
It's never good. It's never good when a plane crashes, but add a fire on top of that, not so great.
In the middle of a jungle.
Yeah.
So all the survivors admitted that the air smelled of burning metal, burning leather, burning rubber, burning fires, burning oil, burning clothes, burning hair, and burning flesh.
Oh.
Yeah. The only reason everyone did not die is because Nicholson had managed to point the nose of the plane skywards in an attempt to clear the ridge. So it hit the mountain at an angle instead of head on, because if they would have hit head on, the whole thing would have exploded. Yeah. And instead, it's like they might have hit something, but it kind of skeetered a little bit up the mountain. It didn't explode on impact. Anyone not immediately killed or mortally wounded would stand a chance of surviving. John McCollum flew across the center aisle from the left side of the plane to the right. He lurched forward through the momentum, doing somersaults as he fell. He was momentarily blacked out. He came to, found himself on his hands and knees, halfway up the cabin towards the cockpit, surrounded by flames. And immediately he's like, exit route, got this. Because he has his training. He saw a flash of white light where the tail had been, and the roof of the cabin had basically looked like it had been stepped on. So anyone who was in the front of the plane is already gone. Yeah. He crawls towards the light, and he actually survives without a scratch.
That's crazy.
I know that the first time you read it, you're just like, I'm sorry, what happened to him? And he's fine. He's fine. Completely fine. Okay. So on top of it, his twin brother and 22 other people are on board, trapped inside, and he believes he's the only survivor because he's the only one who's walked out. And he's lived with his he's lived with his twin brother for his whole life, and they're in like their mid-20s. And his brother has just been married and had a baby. So, like, it's really hard on him because he's like, oh, crap.
Yeah.
What do I do?
I'm sure he's in shock.
Mm-hmm. So, let's go to Margaret. She bounces around the cabin like a rubber ball, and she immediately begins to pray. But because that feels like surrender, she's like, hell no, I'm not doing it. She's pissed. Which I'm like, I just love that response. She's like, I should pray. No, I'm going to survive this.
My vacation is ruined. I am getting out of this.
Well, she had a swimming date planned for when she got back, so she's also pissed about that now.
Priorities.
Exactly. So she took the crash personally because her dream trip to Shangri-La had been spoiled by the plane crash. She hadn't seen any natives, and she's very upset. She found herself lying on top of a motionless man, which, honey, propriety. Unfortunately for her, well, fortunately and unfortunately, he had cushioned her fall, but before he had died, he bear hugged her and then died.
Yeah.
So
that's disgusting.
It's disgusting, but you also have him starting to get into rigor mortis.
Oh no.
So she has to, like, quickly get out of it because the fire's coming towards her, and she feels it licking up her face, her feet, and her legs. And then she smells her hair burning.
Oh no, yeah.
So she's like, I'll just die here. And then she's like, you know what? How about not?
And she got angry. She got angry again.
Yeah. She never underestimate a woman's anger and to get out of a situation then.
Yeah.
She manages to pry loose the man's hands and begins to crawl. Sounds like someone's calling me again. She has no idea where she's heading, and luckily for her, she does not crawl towards the cockpit, which is crushed and on fire. She crawls towards the tail. She doesn't hear anyone else moving or moaning in the cabin, so she's like, okay. And then she gets out, runs into McCollum. He's trying to talk to her, and then they hear another whack scream from inside the plane, quote, "Get me out of here!" So, quote, the Gremlin Special is completely aflame. McCollum's like, give me your hand. He pulls out Laura Beasley, her double date partner. And
at least she's still got her wing woman.
Yeah, she's on fire.
Oh.
And, they get her out. He goes back. McCollum, he's amazing in this whole story. He goes back in and he finds Private Eleanor Hannah, who'd been seated next to Laura, who's directly across from the two, Margaret and McCollum. And he gets her out too. Eleanor's been burned far worse. Her hair is still crackling with embers when she's carried out. He was gonna go in for another rescue mission, but the fire is, getting hotter and more explosive. There's small explosions begin to happen because as it hits certain areas, he's like, okay, this is it. We got 3 whacks and me, which sounds like a really bad either TV show or movie.
Yeah. It needs like a theme song.
But we get one more because all of a sudden a man walks woozily towards them from the right side of the plane, from the other side of the plane. And he's like, is it my brother? It is not his brother.
No.
It's, Sergeant Kenneth Decker, who McCollum actually supervised in the drafting room at Fiasco. Decker is on his feet, badly dazed and hurt. He has a bloody gash several inches along the right side of his forehead. And you can see his skull. So, yay.
He's not going to make it.
The people you think would make it, for the most part, some of them are shocking. Because you're like, you survived a jungle with this injuries. Huh. Decker can't answer how he survived because he never would regain the memory of what happened between takeoff and appearing in the jungle. He never gets it back.
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Later, McCollum would find a hole in the side of the fuselage, which he assumed Decker escaped through, or he had been catapulted through the cockpit and the windshield. Either is not great. On top of it, Decker repeatedly mutters, quote, "Hell of a way to spend your birthday," end quote, because it was his 32nd birthday to that day.
Very memorable birthday.
You can't remember half of it, but it's fine. So, let's take stock. We have a Sergeant McCollum, who's the least injured among the 5 survivors. He's a first lieutenant, so he outranked everyone. And he just starts taking charge, which is good because first of all, Decker couldn't probably think through it, and everyone else is injured. And he begins to order, he goes, "Hastings, can't you do something for these girls?" Basically, because Margaret's the least injured, so she begins to, check them out. And immediately she goes to Eleanor. This bubbly young whack private from rural Pennsylvania didn't seem to be in any pain. remember I said she was severely burned, which means it's already too late.
Yeah. Her nerve endings are probably burnt off.
Yeah. Fire had seared off all her clothes. She's covered with burns on everything except for her face, which is kind of creepy.
It's super creepy.
He goes over to Good, and McCollum actually told Good to, hey, if you're free in the afternoon, we're going on a fun trip to Shangri-La. So he's the reason why Good's there.
Yeah.
Feels a little bad. They get closer to Good. Flames explode from the fuel tanks on the torn off wings, which had remained close to the fuselage. As soon as they subside, they rush to Good, which is too late. He's already dead. And they couldn't really figure out what killed him, the explosion or previous injuries. But when they reach his body, they learned why he didn't move when McCollum first called. His foot was tangled in the roots of a tree, so he couldn't get out.
Yeah, this is like a really bad movie.
Yeah. You think it's like really, like, you're like, this is a movie, but it's real life.
Yeah.
We'll live this. So no one else would emerge from the C-47 Gremlin Special that afternoon or ever. The bodies that remain inside the plane would be cremated, and they actually managed to, when they go back, they recover gold wedding rings with a white inlay that somehow managed to remain intact because it didn't burn hot enough. Inscribed were two sets of initials, CAC and REM, and the date 5/5/43. 2 years before the crash, John McCollum stood next on the altar next to his sister-in-law, Cecilia Adele Connolly, as she slipped a ring onto the finger of Robert Emmert McCollum. So it's his brother's wedding ring.
Aww.
So they managed to recover those. And his wife never remarried either.
Wow. Yeah, that's devastating.
Yeah. So as they're over Captain Good's body, the exploding fuel tanks begins to spread the fire closer to the three surviving women, threatening to trap them in a ring of flames, which is, again, not good. Margaret had saw a small rock ledge on the edge of a cliff some 20 yards down the jungle, covered mountain from the wreckage, so she begins to go towards that. And they basically begin to realize that this jungle is a botanist's dream, but if you're a crash survivor, it's horrifying because it's thick, lush jungle.
Right. So they knew they had to get out of there, but like leaving that situation was hard.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fight. So she manages to sit down because she's really, really hurting. Her feet are hurting, and she begins to take stock. She pulls off her half socks because half of them had burned off, and her right foot was cut badly and bleeding, and she's taking off her left sock. There's not a mark on it, but the bottoms of her left foot were burned because the heat had passed through the fabric to sear the skin. Both her legs had deep burns. Her right hand was cut and bloody. The left side of her face was blistered from heat, so she pulls off her khaki shirt, grabbed her cotton bra, puts her shirt back on, and she tears her bra in half and tries to bandage her feet. Doesn't really do good. Could you imagine using a bra bandage?
No, I can't even imagine being braless.
Thanks. But, I mean, if you don't have that much fabric, you're like, okay, that's what I'm doing. She then removes her underwear, and which, I love this fact, they were mud brown rayon, so that way, because white underwear is banned from the military, because if you're hanging white underwear on a jungle clothesline, it kind of lets the enemy know where you are.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So she intends to use her underwear to make bandages for herself and others. So she's immediately just like, okay, what do I have that I can use for this? So she sees McCollum leading the way over the rough path she had followed minutes before, carrying Eleanor on his back. Halfway down, McCollum loses his footing, slips, landed awkwardly on a small tree. He picks himself up and pulls Eleanor back on. This is his only injury the entire time. He broke his rib, and he told no one about it the entire time.
Yeah, what's he gonna say?
It's kind of those things when you see people like who are injured, and someone's like, "Oh, I cut my hand," and then someone's having a heart attack.
Yeah, and everyone's like, "Fuck off."
They're 9,000 miles above sea level, and the temperature begins to fall. It begins to rain, and even though they have some small trees to give them some cover, they're soaked to the bone, and, half your body's burned. It's raining. You're now cold. Yeah,
it's not going to get worse than this. I mean, it might, but, I mean, that's pretty bad.
So the men rest for a bit, and then they leave the three women on the ledge to climb back up towards the wreckage because McCollum, of course, is an Eagle Scout, and he wants to find supplies, some food, clothing, weapons. All he has is a lighter and a small pocket knife, and he goes, that's not helpful if we run into, like, hostile people. Got this tiny knife. It's only good for close stabbing.
Yeah, right.
And he's like, okay, I remember someone on the crew had a .45 caliber pistol. Yeah, can't find that because much of the cockpit and the cabin are on fire. But
how is there only one gun on a military plane? just a thought.
I have no idea. That's a great question, though. So this fire would continue to burn into the middle of the next day, and it would, like, that's really their best beacon right now is this fire, because the plane is camo.
Oh, in the jungle, cool.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, if you're hiding from the Japanese, yeah, camo plane's great. If your plane crashes in the jungle, you're a little fucked.
This was a really poor plan.
I don't think they planned on the plane crash.
Of course they didn't, but...
So, on top of it, when McCollum gets back up to the scene, he realizes how lucky they are that anyone survived, because on one side of the wreckage is a 15-foot boulder, and then, like, the other side is just, like, more jungle. And he's like, okay, so if we hit it, like, a touch over to the one side, everyone's dead. He climbs into the tail's opening, pulls himself inside. He finds a duffel bag with bright yellow self-inflating raft. That'll be good. You can be like, hey, we're here. Two heavy tarps designed to cover the raft, and a few basic supplies. He tosses the bag outside and begins to climb out. He inflates the raft, which I never got why he inflated the raft, but I think there's supplies inside of it. So he's going to take inventory. They have a couple small tins of water, a first aid kit with bandages, a few vials of morphine, because, we're giving it out.
That's the only good thing they have.
Vitamins, boric acid to disinfect wounds, which, on burns,
no,
it's gotta hurt. It's gotta burn. And sulfadiazole tablets to fight infection. Appreciate my medical pronunciation. And the only food is charms.
Like Lucky Charms?
Yeah, sadder Lucky Charms.
Oh. They're
fruit-flavored hard candies made from sugar and corn syrup.
So, like Lifesavers.
Yeah, like sad Lifesavers. Because I don't even think they're a ring. I think they're just, like, probably a circle.
They're probably, like, beige.
Oh, they probably are beige. I think later they say they're colored so you can sort by fruit flavor. Because they were, like, rotating fruit flavors. Spice of life. He also found a signaling mirror, and even better, a signal pistol, so like a flare pistol. But he couldn't find any flares.
Okay, so useless.
Yeah. So, again, this is why I don't know why he inflated the raft. They hauled the raft and supplies over the ledge. Along the way, the raft snagged on something and got deflated.
What was he thinking?
I'm guessing there had to have been supplies inside the raft that he wanted to see. I'm like, that is so dumb. What are you going to do? I guess it's still a tarp. Technically, it's still a tarp, so you can put it over you.
Yeah.
And it's yellow, so people can see you.
Oh, okay.
They reached the wax, they cleaned and bandaged the wounds, gave them shots of water to take the anti-infection tablets, which is good that they have those. He put the flattened raft underneath Laura and Eleanor and covered them with a tarp, which is good, so then they're not wet. Well, they're still wet, but there's something between them and the ground, and they're covered. And Eleanor smiled, and she keeps saying, let's sing. So McCollum gave...
Oh, my God. No!
Well, I think she's just so out of it.
Yeah. She's like, it's time for a sing-along, guys.
Let's sing as all our friends are dead. Like, if you think about it, that's really, like, everyone that was on the plane with them is dead. And she's like, let's sing. But I think she's just, I don't know, she's not in pain clearly, because she's like you said, her nerve endings are probably burned off. But McCollum gives her a shot of morphine, hoping it helps her sleep. It does. The ledge that they were on was too small for all five of them, so Margaret and the two men move a few yards away on a different ledge. They wrap themselves up in the second tarp, and because McCollum has a packed cigarette, they all share a cigarette. And I think if any time you're like, someone deserves to smoke, it's after you survive a plane crash.
Yeah, even if I didn't smoke, I would start smoking.
Exactly. The next morning, McCollum rose first and went to go check on Eleanor and Laura, and Eleanor is dead.
Oh. The one who was singing?
The one who wanted to sing, but remember, her whole body, except for her face, is burned.
Okay.
So, I mean, even if she had survived, those burns are going to tighten up and you're not going to be able to move.
Oh.
So they have no way to bury her and no energy to even try. So he laid her remains at the base of a nearby tree. They wrapped her up in a tarp that they can't do anything for her, like more than they could do for themselves. So they each get a little water, a few sips with the vitamin pill, and a few charms to tide them over. And they're shaking because they're hungry.
Yeah.
And now the adrenaline's gone. The guys returned to the plane. They found 2 cots, another life raft, 2 more yellow tarps, a small one, 2 compasses, a heavy cotton flying suit, more first aid kits, a signaling mirror, 7 canteens of water, which is good.
Oh, that's good.
But each one only contains a cup of liquid. So not a lot. And Decker digs around the toolkit and brings out a roll of black electrical tape and a pair of pliers. Which I'm like, okay, you can use the tape for a lot of things. And electrical tape is strong as hell.
Yeah.
Laura continues crying and shaking, but she doesn't complain of being in pain. So McCollum gives her one of the flight suits for warmth and told her to lie on one of the cots. Every time she's thirsty and wants water, she would drink a little bit and then spit it up. And even though she looks fine and her burns are superficial, McCollum fears that she has internal injuries, which is really when you have something like that, that's the biggest fear.
Yeah, because you can't see what's going on.
Yeah, it's like internal bleeding and all that. At this time, Margaret's looking at her legs and discovering rings of burned skin, each 3 to 6 inches wide around each calf. They didn't look painful, like as painful as they looked. They looked really bad, apparently.
Yeah.
And they're only gonna look worse. And then her feet are hurting so bad. She asked Laura if she can borrow her shoes while she rests because her shoes survived. And Laura's like, yeah, there's still smoke coming out of the plane, so they're like, okay. As long as someone finds us before this goes out, we're okay.
Yeah. But
the other problem is they crashed into a mountain miles away from the path that led into Shangri-La. And their flight plan said Shangri-La. See where, like, people looking for them might have problems?
Right.
On top of that, Nicholson didn't have time to place a mayday call. He was more trying to survive, and no radio communication had been since they had taken off.
Well, that's kind of a warning sign.
Mm-hmm. So, less than 24 hours after the crash, they did hear the sound of the plane engine. McCollum grabs the signaling mirror and furiously tries to snatch sunlight skyward. It doesn't work, and McCollum tries to reassure his companions. He's like, I don't know how, but they'll get us out. That night, Margaret ends up sleeping next to Laura, and she's like, Laura's not, she's fidgeting the whole time on this cot, so it's not comfortable. Around midnight, she woke up because it was suddenly very still. Laura had stopped fidgeting.
Forever.
So, yeah. She has no pulse. So she calls McCollum, and he's like, oh my god, this woman is overreacting. Ugh.
This damn woman. They're always overreacting.
Yeah. There's some cases where they're like, I'm so impressed for a woman for her. And you're like,
what?
Legitimately, she just wants to live. So he goes back, and he's like, she was hurt. She's not keeping down water, but she should be dead. He goes over, he checks her hands, they're cold, he checks her pulse, no pulse. He lifts up her body, Laura's body from the cot. He wrapped her in one of the remaining tarps and placed it along Eleanor Hannah's body at the foot of the tree. So the ones that they do get out, they do kind of at least put together and do some semblance of like, we're sorry, but they don't have anything to do.
Yeah. They
don't have a shovel. It's the jungle. They're all injured now.
Yeah. They have other things to worry about besides burying bodies.
Yeah. So listen to how lucky Margaret and McCollum are. Margaret had changed seats for a better view, and McCollum had boarded too late to sit next to his brother. They ended up in the last 2 seats on the left side of the plane. They lived. Laura and Eleanor, who had sat across from them, had died.
Yeah.
Like, legitimately, they were just on the right side of the plane.
Yeah. Usually in plane crashes, when you hear that a couple people lived, it's like total luck. Like, it depends where you're sitting or...
Yeah. So let's go over the 3 survivors of the Gremlin Special. We have John McCollum, a stoic 26-year-old first lieutenant from the Midwest who had just lost his brother. Kenneth Decker, a tech sergeant from the Northwest who had an awful head wound who just celebrated his 34th birthday. Worst birthday ever, I'm going to go with. Margaret Hastings, an adventure-seeking 30-year-old whack corporal from the Northeast who had missed her date for an ocean swim on the New Guinea coast.
She missed her swim.
She missed her swimming date. She actually had a lot of dates, and they comment on that. She was very, because she was fun, and she was popular, and she was feisty, and I was like, I like it. I like you.
I like her life.
Yeah. And a lot of the information that we get from this is that Margaret keeps a journal through the whole thing. So McCollum returns to Margaret, who's still on the cot, and he lit a cigarette and hands it to her because they're sharing it because one of their friends just died again. And Margaret wrote in her diary, quote, "No night will ever be as long as this one," end quote.
Yeah, I saw that her diary was like 20,000 words. So she spent a lot of time writing.
I mean, there's a certain point where she can't really walk, and so what else do you do? And she did a good job at recording everything that happened. So plane crash survivors are normally told to remain with the wreckage to increase likelihood of being found. This is New Guinea. This is not what's going to happen because they're in a jungle. So morning of May 15th, so we're on day 2, McCollum determines that he's changed his mind. They can't wait for Margaret and Decker to feel stronger to trek to the clearing he spotted from a tree. So he got up and done some surveying to figure out where to go. So he assembles most of their supplies in one of the remaining yellow tarps. He packs a smaller one for Decker and gave Margaret a pail that he had found in the plane's tail. In there were her day's rations, 2 tins of water, a few yellow cellophane wrapped charms. Yeah, they're wrapped in saran wrap too on top of that.
Saran wrap.
Saran wrapped candy, guys. And how to politely say this? McCollum has to go to Laura's body for a necessary task. He unwrapped the tarp and removes the flight suit that he had given her for warmth because her clothes have been burned off. So they're like, okay, we'll give it to Margaret so that way, because her legs are so messed up that they need protection from, like, imagine if they're, like, bumping into things.
Yeah.
It's not going to feel great.
I can't believe they have to leave the plane.
I think if they don't leave the plane, they would have died.
Yeah.
Like, maybe McCollum might have survived, but the other 2 definitely would have died because there's no water.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. So he uses his pocket knife to shorten 12 inches of fabric so Margaret can wear the flight suit without tripping over herself. She's not that tall. She's probably about 5'2", and this is probably made for a man. So they first had to climb up from the ledge where they had spent their previous 2 nights safely, walk past the wreckage, and because the jungle is so thick, they have to crawl on their hands and knees. On top of it, in a few places, a wrong step would mean a fall into a rocky ravine, and others it would mean the plunge over over a cliff. So on top of it, Margaret has longer hair, and it keeps getting hot. And eventually, she just tells McCollum to hack it off. So he takes his pocket knife and cuts her hair into like a bob.
Worst field trip ever.
It's the worst vacation ever. But, like, she's the one who said, like, because they had to keep stopping to untangle it. And eventually she's just like, cut it off. Just cut it all off. And I mean, he actually did a decent job from the photos.
It didn't look like a mommy dearest haircut.
No. I think they cleaned it up, too, once they got to camp, like, a bit. But
they were like, look at your hair, Margaret.
Because there's pictures of them at one of the camps they're at. So they stumble upon what Margaret would consider a miracle, a dry creek bed or a gully that formed a narrow path. And it was really just so much easier going then, because they don't have to crawl.
Yeah.
While the gully is angled sharply downwards, in some places forcing them to climb, slide, or jump down the rocky slopes. They have to climb over boulders and tree trunks. It's a trail. They stop about every half an hour to rest because 2 of them are severely injured.
Yeah.
And eventually they begin to notice trickles of icy water coming into the gully from mountain creeks, and they're like, yay! Yeah. Margaret and Decker are both like, we're gonna drink this. And McCollum's like, what about waterborne germs? But they're like, nope, we're gonna drink this.
They're like, fuck it.
Which at this point, you're like, okay, it's really cold water, so it's probably pretty clean. But, it's gonna be a river. So eventually it gets very swift and deep, and it threatens to take them away. One of the challenges, anytime they reach like a waterfall, at first they did a shoulder trick where McCollum would go down and then they stand on his shoulders and kind of climb down him, but it's too deep. So they do, which I think is the funnest thing ever. McCollum found a thick vine that hung along the trees, and he's testing it, and they swing over the falls.
How is this
the jungle style?
How is this real life?
I know. You're like, this isn't real. And Margaret's like, I got this. She goes, McCollum caught her as she let go of the vine, then came Decker. They hike until early afternoon, as the daily mist and rain rolls in. So they can't find a spot on the bank large enough to camp. So they keep going until they can go no farther and set up at a spot that's not ideal because they're basically on this narrow wedge of the riverbank, which you don't want to do anyways if you've watched enough Naked and Afraid as I have. Riverbeds are great, but riverbeds, remember, animals go there. Just saying. And he puts one tarp down underneath them, one tarp over them. They have a few charms. And I love this. McCollum's in between Decker and Margaret, so he could care for both of them.
Aww.
So he's just like, boop, 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 back and forth. Oh, sorry, podcasting's not a visual medium. I'm just rolling, I'm pretending like I'm rolling back and forth to take care of two different people.
They know what you meant.
Yeah. They were also a little creeped out because earlier in the day, they noticed that they weren't alone. There was the outlined in the mud was a fresh human footprint, and they're like,
natives.
Yeah. On top of that, as they're falling asleep, they hear strange barking sounds, which are also natives.
Oh.
But likelihood the footprint wasn't a native. It was the true Westerner discoverer of the valley, which was Richard Archibald, a young man who was born extremely rich, and he visited the valley on the ground, which was kind of known at this point. He actually managed to land on one of those seaplanes on a lake. So he does basically an anthropological survey and all of that, and he's like talking about the natives, but he kind of causes some issues. And the book goes more in depth into the second journey, which is really he has interacted with the natives, and this interaction could have gone very bad for the survivors or very good for the survivors. And luckily for them, it went well. So one of his men shot a native.
Why? Why do we do this?
It was like mainly like I think they had a disagreement, and one of the men shot him, and so they could have run into this group of natives that had their first interactions with outsiders marked with blood.
Yeah.
Which isn't good, because then they would also could have treated them very horribly. And Archibald actually did admit to it for a while, because he published long pieces for National Geographic.
But he forgot that part.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Because as much as I love National Geographic, the early history of National Geographic is very racist.
Oh.
Because it's early anthropology, so it's very much in the primitive, the other, like, racist, eugenics kind of thread.
Yeah.
And they're finally coming to terms with that, which is really nice, but yeah. So we're on day 3, May 16th, and they continue their trek. As soon as Margaret begins to stand, her whole body is racked in pain. And here, because overnight, her joints had stiffened and the burns on her skin had tightened around the muscles. So they're choking off blood flow, starving healthy flesh.
Oh no.
Mm-hmm. She can't straighten up, and the infections and her injuries were beginning to turn quickly into fast-killing wet gangrene. So there's 2 types of gangrene. There's the slow one that you mostly think of. The wet one is you're in a moist area, and so it's pussy and gross, and it spreads quickly, and it causes sepsis, which is blood poisoning. So
she needs help ASAP.
And her fear is that her legs would have to be amputated because it's around her calf. So if you amputate above the knee, she would be okay. So crazily, Margaret, she's like, okay, I got this. I'm not kidding you. She's you could just imagine this woman be like, I can't let these men see my pain.
She just got mad.
Yeah. She begins to force herself upright, walking back and forth to get her joints and skin to loosen up for the continued journey.
Ugh.
So anyone who's had a burn or you have a giant scab on your skin can know this pain. Especially if it's on a joint, you're just oh, this hurts. But imagine it's the bottom half of your leg and your face.
No thanks.
Yeah. On top of it, she looks over at Decker, who's also burned and has this head injury, and she's in her diary, she remarks at how stoic he remains, and she's that is amazing. And McCollum also has commented that he's at this point, he's I have this responsibility for them to come out alive, but also they are strong people.
Yeah, they're super amazing people.
Decker had not once complained the whole time about his gaping head wound and other injuries, and they start calling Margaret Maggie, even though she hates it. They do the military stiffness, the guys are always Decker, McCollum, and then they're Maggie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they all start calling each other by their first name, because after a while, it's you're stuck here with these people. You know them so well at this point.
The will to live is amazing.
Yeah. Well, he's just so impressed because she's soldiering on with gangrenous wounds on her legs and hands, but also the burns on her left side of the face is darkened, so they're starting to heal. So her face is going to be okay as long as she doesn't pick at it like I tend to do with burns. He's pretty sure both of them have full-blown wet gangrene, and he's like, if planes don't find us, like, they're going to be dead, and he's not even going to have the marker of, like, the plane crash for their bodies. So now the stream bank was too deep for them to walk on, and the jungle foliage is giving them nothing. So they step down the 8-foot bank back into the mountain streams to continue walking in a river.
So they're just looking for a clear path, like a clear area.
Yeah, they're looking for an easy route because we'll find out later, Decker is actually a lot more injured than he looks.
Oh.
And he, Margaret can't walk very well, so are you going to have someone who has, like, basically her shin burned climb through the jungle? And it just takes so much longer. So McCollum keeps getting further and further ahead because Maggie and Decker are injured, so they move a little slower. So she begins to panic. Quote, McCollum has gone off and left him, and he's got all the food. We're going to starve to death. End quote. And she plops down in the stream, and she's just kind of, I think she's hurting, she's tired, she's stressed. And Decker has had enough. He turns on her, and Margaret doesn't quote the full tirade at her in her diary, but she admits that he called her a piker, a quitter, and basically gets her so angry that she keeps moving, and they catch up to go because it's her pride. He wounds her pride. So back in Hollandia, the Gremlin Special's failure to return sent shockwaves through the Fiasc headquarters. The radio silence certainly meant a crash, and a crash meant a search. So finally, yeah, this is probably about the same, like probably that night. So the plane they heard that morning was probably looking for them. But their initial outset, as always, is a rescue mission: find survivors or find remains to return to families. They have, because it's an Air Force base, they have almost unlimited access to pilots and planes, which is really good. And because these are colleagues and friends and subordinates, they're going to have people volunteering. And more significantly, there are 9 WACs on board. So there's 9 women on board. The reason why it was pointed out is because women didn't really die in World War II. Like, American women, at least.
So were they more concerned because they were women?
Yes. Oh, yes. So most deaths of women during the war came singly or in pairs. Exceptions included 6 nurses killed by German bombings in the battle on Anzio. So 2 weeks before this crash, 6 nurses among 28 crew members were killed when a Japanese kamikaze pilot slammed into the U.S. Navy hospital ship Comfort off of the islands between Guam and Okinawa. So it's big news when it hits. People know when women have died in combat because, I mean, we just gave women permission to fight in combat. Yeah. That idea.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So after the missed return time, calls were made to Allied landing strips throughout the region to see if they had landed somewhere else, but no luck. So they hauled out their inadequate maps and divided the island into sectors so pilots could have made, where they could have made a forced landing. Even though it's raining, airborne searchers spent 3 days scouring those sectors, where they thought they could have landed. And they put Colonel Ellsmore, remember, who discovered quote unquote the valley, because he knew the valley better than anyone else in the U.S. military. So they're like, we're putting this person in charge. He knows the area well.
That's good.
Around 11 o'clock on May 16th, 5 hours after trudging through the stream, McCollum climbed up the 8-foot bank. Just these banks are horrible, and then everyone's injured. Broken ribs are no joke. And he told them to come on up. This is the clearing he made. So
they found it.
They did find it. Yeah. So I just love Margaret. When she gets to the top, she just fell flat on her face into earth. She's just so tired. The boys go ahead. Well, she crawled after them on her hands and knees because, again, remember, her legs are janked.
Yeah.
She reaches them half an hour later, 50 yards from the stream, and the guys are panting, laying on the ground. She's enjoying being in the sun because they hadn't seen it because of the jungle. And then they hear the roar of 4 powerful engines.
Yes.
It's a B-17 bomber high above them. They were trying to draw its attention, but the pilot of the Flying Fortress, I just love plane names in World War II. They're great. Flew away without spotting them.
Come on. Oh, I know. My God.
They ate some charms.
Okay.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and some charms. They were sad because the plane missed them, but they were like, okay, they're looking for us. An hour later, another it could be the same or another one, made a pass over the clearing. McCullum's not taking any chances. He jumped to his feet. He said, get out the tarps, because remember, they're yellow.
Oh, yeah.
And that'll stick out. So they untied their supplies and spread out the yellow tarp to cover the ground. The captain of this plane, William D. Baker, was flying overhead the jungle at a high altitude. He had brought the chaplain along with his normal crew so that way, like, in case, like, they do find something, like, they find the crash and there's no signs of survivors and whatnot. So Margaret's like, they're gonna miss us back on the ground. And it seemed like they were gonna have another miss again. But Captain Baker turns the bomber and circles back over the clearing. He had not given them any traditional signs that he had seen them. And even if he had seen them, he couldn't mistake them for natives because they have clothes on.
Yeah.
So the native population here wears, the women have basically a sarong that covers the bottom, and the guys have penis gourds.
Penis gourds?
Yes.
What is that?
It is a gourd that just covers the penis.
An actual gourd?
Yeah.
Oh my.
Yeah. It's exactly what it sounds like. But really, the clearest sign that it was the survivors was the yellow tarp. Less than 5 minutes after they had spotted the B-17, the plane returns with favor. He races the engines, he dips his wings to basically tell them, like, hey, I see you, I got you. They had found the survivor. Not known to them, they're not alone down at the jungle.
Oh.
Hiding in the nearby jungle was a group of native men and boys from the nearby village. Among them is Hemla Wankik. He saw them. The author actually goes back and interviews people who were there at the time. So people who were kids at the time, he would talk to them about what they remember from the survival. So you get both sides on my side.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So Baker logged their position by latitude and longitude and had his crew drop 2 rafts as markers as close to the position of the clearing so other planes can find them. And Decker explains then his dry wit. He told McCullum, quote, I suppose one of us will have to marry Maggie and give this adventure a proper romantic ending, end quote.
Poor Maggie.
And so McCullum, they're just joking around. He goes, quote, she'll have to put on more meat before I'm interested, end quote. Margaret, then, pride injured, goes, quote, I wouldn't marry you if you were the last man in the world. I'm going to marry Decker, end quote. Which is funny because she had already turned him down for a date weeks before their flight and wouldn't give her the last word. He just responded, the hell you are. And they were wondering how long they would get real supplies because they were so tired of charm.
Charm sounds really cool, but I don't know. It's a very depressing treat.
It'd be like eating Jolly Ranchers for every meal. Just every meal. And you can't have a lot of them because you need to ration them out. Think about that too. You're having 1 or 2.
Yeah.
It's a horrible meal. Well, as they're sitting here and chatting, all of a sudden, Margaret realizes, hey, this isn't a natural clearing. Someone has painstakingly cut down trees and dragged out the shrubs. And they were sprawled in a mountainside garden of sweet potatoes or camote mixed with a smattering of wild rhubarb. And she's like, oh crap, someone's gonna come back for this. Also, we can't go back to the stream or leaving this place because they've just been spotted. So they're like, okay, we're gonna hope that these people don't come here often or are nice. Which, about an hour after the plane leaves, they meet their first friends.
Ooh, exciting.
They hear the sounds of what sounds like yaps and barks of faraway packs of dogs.
What?
Yeah, so basically it's, I think, communication signals between them, the native population. And they realize that, oh, these aren't dogs. No, these aren't dogs. These are humans. So they're trying to figure out where this is coming from. And all of a sudden, dozens of nearly naked black men appear with hands filled with enzis made from wood and sharpened stone emerge from the jungle.
Is that a weapon?
And, yeah, it's like a spear. They have spheres and stuff like that. So basic tools. Basic weapons, if you think back. Because I would say, if we're gonna, and I hate doing this, but just for image sake, this population is probably moving. They don't have iron or any hardened stones, but they do have stones that they have sharpened into points. but they also have like an organized agricultural society.
Yeah.
For those of you who've taken anthropology or know some semblance of that, they meet these men, and they actually kind of, the natives like them, and they have good interactions. They have one that they call Pete, and he's the main person they communicate with. And McCollum actually hopes that like they'll help him with medicine, like at least have something.
Yeah, it must be pretty obvious that they're injured.
Yeah, but for the population, you take care of the soul first. So he like took care of their souls.
Oh.
But not their physical, like they still have gangrene, like wet gangrene. But it really helps them because them being nice to the natives and all of that. Granted, the person whose garden it wasn't pleased. He was not a fan of them because they're laying in his garden. But they kind of keep them protected and like help them out throughout this whole journey. They don't give them food, but
what?
Yeah, we'll get to a point where they try to share food with them, but it's a very ceremonious thing to share meals. So you're not going to do it unless you trust someone. So at first they're just kind of watching them for a while. So back at the base, Elsemore's team assembles what one observer called enough equipment to stock a small country store. They fill cargo parachutes to crates filled with the essentials of 10-in-1 food rations, blankets, tents, first aid kits, two-way radios, batteries, and shoes. Shoes are important always in war. And having spotted what looked like a whack on the ground, they included the less conventional jungle survival necessities, including lipstick and bobby pins.
Why?
Because men are packing this.
They're like, this is what Margaret needs.
Oh, don't worry, later on, because the women on the base, their cycles are so messed up. They're like, McCollum's like, I don't know, do you know when your next cycle's gonna be? And she's like, I don't know, I haven't had it in a while. So they're like, okay, send some sanitary products. And they send so much.
They have no idea.
They have no idea. And it's so funny. They send like probably enough for like 20 women for like a year. Like it's so many. And they're just like, and it's like every couple of drops, like every drop has like 5 boxes. And you're just like, do you think she's dying? Like, it's ridiculous. Then comes to the more serious problem. They have no idea how to reach the survivors or get them back. Because if there had been a way to land a plane in Shangri-La and take off again, Elsemore would have already been there, done that. And the Dutch and Australian authorities who had been in contact, because they'd reached out, they're like, we'll help with an overland track, but you can't, they're like, okay, if we don't have native bearers to carry things, because yes, that's still a thing. Basically, they would hire native populations to carry things for them.
Oh.
It was a traditional way of doing things, and I know in certain areas, just because of the difficulty of bringing in like trucks and all that, it still happens, or like you hire them. But the other problem is they don't know how many hostile tribes or Japanese soldiers are hiding in the jungles between them and the survivors. So that's not a great idea. Helicopters? Yeah, no. Remember the altitudes.
Yep.
And they're like, okay, what about landing a seaplane on the Baleen River? Which they didn't know at this point that someone's already done that. And that's how a lot of people get in now. Every idea is having a logistical problem. So they're mainly trying to get them help on the ground first. They're like, okay, let's drop some paratroopers, soldiers and medics, who wouldn't mind being outnumbered by presumably cannibalistic natives.
Yeah, we'll figure out how to get everyone out later.
Mm-hmm. But infantry-trained paratroopers were in the thick of the fight, as far as they know. And there's none committed near Hollandia. And there's really no set protocol for getting them out, which is what happens.
They're just winging it.
Yeah. Well, one of the officers in Hollandia, John Babcock, learned that his former student was based in Hollandia, C. Earl Walter Jr. He remembered that he had been expelled from school as a troublemaker, and second, that he was now an infantry-trained paratrooper frustrated about being stuck in Hollandia. So the reason why he's stuck there is his dad is this like crazy awesome dude who's fighting in the Philippines. He lived in the Philippines before the Japanese had taken it over, and he's like leading the guerrilla warfare. So he's got some pull with the U.S. Army, and his son is now in Hollandia away from fighting. What they do know about sending these guys in is there's about 60,000 or so natives on the main valley floor, tens of thousands in the surrounding areas who have organized themselves into small fenced villages or hamlets. Most had 30 to 50 people living communally. Larger villages might have several times that number. That they do know that there are hostilities between groups, but they have no reason to know why. They've always been enemies, so they will remain enemies. And they did see a cluster of huts as the Gremlin Special flew by before the crash, and it was a village of the natives called Uwambo. The villagers, all of the Yali tribe, were busy with their chores. As soon as they heard the plane, they ducked for cover, which is why they didn't see any.
Oh.
Yes. So when the Uwambe people come to see them, Pete and all of them remember they had heard a Ulak legend that anticipated the return of spirits whose rope to the valley floor had been cut. The legend describes these creatures from the Anu perfectly. Light skin, long hair, light eyes, arms covered. Anu made sense too. In the absence of the rope, the sky spirits had found another way to the valley. So they think
white devils.
Not that they're white devils, but they're like white spirits, god things.
Yeah.
So a native Yarlock went up to see, and his nephew later explained, quote, something cataclysmic was happening. He didn't want to create panic or be blamed. These were spirits. The legend said long-haired people would come down from the sky. They were horrified. This could be the end times. It was something they had been talking about and hearing about for generations, end quote. So
they were just as scared of us, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, the population, you don't want to be the bearer of bad news because they do kill the messenger. They blame the messenger in this culture. Yeah. And they did consume the flesh of their enemies, so the cannibalistic nature that they had heard about wasn't wrong. So the native population actually had every reason to consider it wise to strike at them first, but they didn't have any weapons. And so McCollum told them, we just have to be friendly, smile, and pray at work. And they tried to offer them some charms.
They're charms.
And I know, McCollum's count had them at about 40 adult males. And she said Margaret said over their shoulders they carried wicked-looking stone axes. So that's the Enze. And at least one carried a long spear. She felt her hands shaking, holding out the charms, and she felt like they just kept coming. People kept coming. And at last, an older man steps forward. He was wiry and alert, naked except for a necklace with a narrow piece of shell strung above his sternum. His penis cord was more than a foot long, pointed towards the sky, and they took that to be the chief. He beckons them towards the log bridge, and they really struggling to move, and he's like, come on. McCollum's like, I think we better go and humor them. But Margaret really can't move. She can barely stand, and she's pretty sure she would fall off the log. She was worried that she would be asked to deliver herself to men that she thought were savages.
Oh, boy.
Or worse, cannibals. The man that they thought was the chief, and called Pete, was Wimbaku Windaki, who is a leader, not a chief, in Uwambu. He acted kindly towards the creatures he thought were sky spirits because he had learned the Ulake legend. I'm apologizing for my pronunciation. I'm doing my best.
They won't know.
Yeah. Wimbaku thought that something good would come from the spirit's return, even though it meant the end of an era. He hoped that it would be a new era, better for his people. As they go back and forth doing greetings, the natives start a fire and begin to cook sweet potatoes, which the natives called hippari. McCollum bent down and pulled up a plant that he thought looked like rhubarb. He wiped up the dirt, bit the stalk, and felt smoke shooting from his ears, and then spits it out, which makes the natives laugh, all except for one farmer. So the farmer and his daughter really don't like them, but Pete, because he's one of the leaders and a lot of the people see them as good things. So the natives leave, pack up, take all their food, because I think they realized that they were injured and they weren't going to, they couldn't really communicate.
Yeah.
But Margaret wakes up in the middle of the night, sensing someone hovering over her, and before she could scream, she recognized it was Pete. He was worried about them, and he come back to see how they were, and he was hovering over them like a mother hen. So they realized that they have, Pete just basically comes and checks on them every night to make sure they're okay, and that, others aren't bothering them.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is a very long story. So, back in Hollandia, we have John Babcock meeting with his student, Walter, and they're talking. Walter has been training Filipino paratroopers to go, they're basically prepared to go behind the enemy lines, and if they're Filipino, you blend in a little better in this area. So they realized, Walter was like, oh wait, we can do this. We can go into the jungle. We have this experience. We're paratroopers. We're the only paratroopers around. So after he talks to Babcock, they kind of figure out, he goes and tells the man, we'll be jumping into unknown areas, so you need your wit and compasses about you. we need 2 medics to be dropped as close as possible to the survivors in the thick jungle. In this it's a horrible area to drop people. And mind you, I believe they're still using circular parachute.
Right.
Which isn't great for steering.
Oh, these guys are super ballsy.
That's like any paratroopers before, like in like World War I, World War II is super ballsy because the ones we see now, you can kind of, you know how you see them like steering them?
Yeah.
You couldn't really steer them. Because the circle, like you kind of just drop at the pleasure of the wind. So, you have 2 medics go down, and then Walter and 8 other volunteers would drop down, some 20 to 30 air miles away. They would establish a base camp with the goal of leading the medics and the survivors from the crash site down into the valley. There is no possibility that the natives will be kind to them, and they'll be outnumbered by hundreds. Even if they get to so say everything goes perfect, they land and everything, they still have to hike 150 miles either north or to the south coast of New Guinea with the crash survivors who might be hurt and unable to walk on their own.
So they see them and then decide to drop these guys 150 miles away?
No, that's like if their plan is to like hike out. Like if they hike out, they're going to have to hike about like...
Got it.
Like an extensive distance with injured people.
Oh, okay.
And so the paratroopers are all on board. They're like, yes, we're bored. Let's go. Everyone volunteers. Back with the group on the ground. They spot the first plane at 9 in the morning, a C-47, and they realize what this looks like from the natives' perspective for the first time. They begin dropping a crate. The guys go in to retrieve the box, and she begins taking notes of where subsequent chutes and boxes landed. So the men take a while to drag the crate out. They get something more valuable than food, a portable FM radio, which can be used to transmit and receive messages.
It's a box of tampons.
I don't think tampons were a thing, so it's like those weird, these things like weird belt things.
Yes.
So they lugged a 35-pound two-way radio the size of a small suitcase bag. And it receives, it can be carried on the back of a soldier and receives the nickname walkie-talkie. So fun fact, World War II, the start of walkie-talkies. So they get back and, McCollum, calls over the radio. This is Lieutenant McCollum, give me a call, do you read me over? And the answer comes back swiftly. This is 313, which is basically the serial numbers of the plane. And so they go back and forth, 313 calling 952. So they get a perfect connection and they begin to like go back and forth and give them updates on how they are. Now that they get all the other boxes in, and Colin's like, okay, we gotta deal with this wet gangrene problem because it's gross and it's gonna kill everyone.
Yeah.
Well, except for McCollum because he doesn't have it, but everyone else. And if you're a little squeezy, skip ahead. So Margaret rolls up her pants to explode the wide rings of burns around their calf. Unattended for 4 days, they oozed pus and reeked of dying flesh.
Oh, God.
The cuts and burns on both her feet turned gangrenous, and as had part of her hand. The guys looked at her and were alarmed, and she begins to freak out that she's going to lose her legs. So, and she's like, if I let down my guard, I might spiral into a panic. So she lets McCollum apply ointment that they found in the jungle kits, and he wraps her wound. Then they turn to Decker. The gap on his forehead is deep and oozing, while Boimaku, or Pete's, breath might have saved his soul. It did nothing to help his wound. And they're like, we don't want to touch it unless we have like proper tools and sterile equipment because it's going to make it worse. And his appeared broken elbow, they're like, yeah, we're not going to touch that either because we're going to fuck it up more. But they remembered in previous days, Decker had mentioned discomfort caused by his pants sticking to his backside. So they're like, oh, it might be burned, but there's no, the fabric's not torn or scorched, so they, like, it couldn't be that bad. So McCollum's like, okay, drop your pants, lie face down on the ground. And it's bad.
Oh.
His back is severely burned. It just burned through the fabric. So I don't know how this man was walking or doing anything, and I'm just impressed. So they do the same thing. They bandaged it up and everything, and they're hoping that medics get to them soon. So the paratroopers are flying over. It's Saturday, May 19th, so we're 6-ish days out.
6 horrible days in.
Yeah.
At least Margaret got to meet the natives.
I know, she got to meet the natives finally. They're like the first army people who did. So he has his 2 medics, Rami Ramirez and Doc Lutalo, and they're passing over the intended drop zone, which looked horrible. Like, it's not great. And they had already, like, observed it 2 days earlier. So because of the unpredictable mountain winds, he's dropped 5 wind dummies, which seems excessive. And makes it like, they're just sitting there like, I agreed to this, but this is an excessive amount of dummies. And these dummies are weighted bundles used to assess turbulence. And Walter said, quote, "The reason I dropped 5 is because every one of them changed direction, so I had no idea, basically, end quote, which way the winds would blow the medics." And the guys actually, he's like, okay, we have to just do it. So they drop him. Ramirez twists his ankle, like, because he lands on a rock, but he's okay. And as soon as they land, they're surrounded by natives, and they're like, the guys have guns, but the natives are like, "Oh no, we'll take you to them because it's the same tribe."
Yeah, luckily.
So the boys it takes them several hours trekking through around ferns, vines, trees, and all of that. They reach the clearing, and the survivors are so happy to see them. Immediately starting with Decker, they begin to do like medical stuff because they also drop medical supplies. So they grab the medical supplies that they found. The medics poured peroxided and antibacterial powder called sulfamidide on the wound and onto the gangrenous burns on his butt. So he has a gangrenous butt.
Ugh.
Which sounds so horrible.
I bet it's horrible.
You can't sit, and basically for a long period of time, he's just laying on his stomach because he can't do anything else. The gash on his head is too wide to stitch, but Doc Butello, who took lead on the medical matters, gently massaged the skin around the wound, pushing the 2 sides closer so they could eventually be knit together, as Ramy worked on his broken elbow. He fashioned a splint from tree bark and held it against his arm as he wrapped bandages, immobilizing it. They really don't want to, again, set it, because without x-rays, they're like, we could set it completely wrong, and then you can't use your arm. And he could use his arm later on, so.
I don't know how he's alive.
I mean, how were any of them except for McCullum alive at this point? Then they took their attention to Margaret and spent the next 2 hours working on her legs. So basically, they would change the bandages, but every time McCullum would have to change the bandages before this, he'd have to rip them off. Like the pus. So they have been like, he would put ointment on them, they would pus, they'd have to change the bandages. So for both of them, they'd have to like rip off the bandages every time. But if you think about it, it's kind of better because it's airing it out and it's not letting that illness stay in, but it's so gross when you think about it.
Yeah.
Spend 2 hours basically ripping off bandages and putting new bandages on in a better method because they know what they're doing. But I think really them taking care of the wounds, like at least trying to save them somewhat because it wasn't letting the gangrene form, like stay formed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's good they dropped medics off first.
Yeah. So Walter and his men then jump in the northwest part of the valley, an area known to the natives as Wushy. So get ready for some uncomfortableness.
More?
Oh, this part's just really uncomfortable. So then they're immediately surrounded by natives, and Walter convinces his men not to shoot, but because they have never seen clothing before, they begin to just like, they say rubbing them, but they're just touching their clothes all over. And it was like, okay, they're like, okay. And
that must have been really scary.
It was really scary because the Americans thought it was sexual.
What?
They thought the natives believed they were women, and Walter's trying to communicate that they're male, and he goes, nope, they keep rubbing. And at a point, Walter described it as making love. So Walter's like, okay, we're going to go unconventional. So he just strips to show that he could wear a gourd himself. So the guys all strip.
So weird.
And and then finally,
they're just getting to know each other.
Well, the natives then thought that they're like, this is odd, because they're like, they knew they were men, and they were just confused by the clothing. So then more people come to see, because they're like, there's some naked dudes. And finally, they put their clothes back on, and they were just, all the guys are so edgy, and they're putting together a camp, and they just fire some shots into the sky, just to like, leave us alone.
Just for fun.
Well, mainly just to scare them, because they're like, please stop.
Wow.
Stop touching us. And I mean, if it's gone on for hours, stop touching me. Unconsensual petting, please no. So the next day, May 22nd, Walter has their guys fuel up on a breakfast of ham, eggs, biscuits, marmalade, and washed it down with hot chocolate.
What?
World War II must have made everybody, like, because they would always put like chocolate bars and stuff in there, like have them have hot chocolate, because it's actually really substitutive if you're doing actual old school hot chocolate. But I don't think that many people had chocolate before, and then so much chocolate. So him and 5 men begin to like trek to the survivors site. That left his first sergeant in charge of base camp along with 2 sergeants to enlist a group of the Dani men as carriers and native guides. So they're like, okay, you guys bring up the supplies. We'll get there first to make sure they're okay. So it takes them a couple days to get there, and the supply plane radios down. They're gonna get to you soon. And then Margaret hears the yapping sound, and as soon as they get, a little bit sooner, they hear, shoo shoo, my baby, shoo shoo, goodbye, my baby, don't you cry no more. Your big, tall papa's off to the 7 seas, because Walter is singing. He's hiking through the jungle singing. So now the camp has expanded to 10 men, 1 woman. They begin to set up basically a camp so they can, help wait there until the survivors are healthy enough to go back.
And try to figure out how to get out of there.
Yes. So on May 27th, so we started this on the 13th, nearly 2 weeks after the crash, Walter woke at 7 in the morning and heads out to the wreck because they dropped grave markers for those who passed. And I love this. They did crosses for Christians. They had a couple stars of David's for those who were Jewish.
Huh.
And I'm like, but they couldn't find, they had to set out a couple days and they couldn't find their way back up to the crash, which just shows you how confusing this jungle is. So McCollum had to lead the men back up, and he knew they were close when they spotted wispy strands of light brown hair in the vines and the shrubs.
Ew.
It's Margaret's hair. That's how caught it got. Well, now that they knew that the survivors were okay, they let it slip back to the U.S. that, hey, there's something amazing happening in this jungle. And several reporters take the bait, and they begin to, just every time they're doing the supply drop, every day, there's reporters there asking them questions, talking to the survivors and all that. So Friday, June 15, 33 days after the crash, Doc Boutella gives Margaret and Decker a thorough going over to make sure their wounds have sufficiently healed. They are fit enough to travel. So that means Margaret's not losing her legs, and Decker's not losing, I guess, Zach.
It's time to go.
Yeah. So while they needed more medical treatment, they were out of immediate danger and could hike with help to the Big Valley. Everyone is so stir crazy. They're like, let's go. So he delayed their departure till noon, though, so the supply plane could drop off extra flares and spare walkie-talkies in case of problems happened en route to the camp. So remember I said they dropped a lot of Kotex?
Yes.
To them? So the guys have packed up their backpack, and McCollum noticed that there's unused boxes of Kotex that have been dropped from Margaret. An excessive amount. A box would have been fine. But he goes, Maggie, are you going to use this? And she's like, no. So he opened the boxes, and he handed out sanitary napkins for the men and to tuck under the shoulders of the heavy backpacks. And, he said later, man, those are good for that sort of thing. So they were putting padding on the shoulders with pads.
That's hilarious.
So they didn't realize, because of their relationship with the natives, that Pete, as they like to call him, had given them a sort of gift. They bestowed a MAGA, which is a declaration of safe passage along the attended route. So they basically told natives all up and down, let them pass. These are sky spirits.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So after they left, the visitors broke up the camp, and the natives gathered everything that was left behind and put it into a cave because, quote, nobody knew what the food was. The people were afraid of it, so they put it in one place and it became sacred objects. Pigs were killed and their blood was sprinkled on it in a purification ceremony, end quote.
It's like they saged the place.
Yeah. They planted a bamboo-like tree near the entrance to market as a place of magic. I just love that they're like, we don't know what this is, so it must be sacred.
Yeah.
So they hike for that whole day, and again, Margaret is impressing everyone. They're like, she's really hurting, but she's still going. On days 3 of their day on the trail, June 17th, Walter was so impressed, he goes, she could be a first-rate infantry soldier, which is, at that point, really a high compliment. So they finally make it into the valley, and it is 5 weeks since they left Hollandia. They finally get the first-hand look at Shangri-La. How disappointing is that?
Yeah. Shangri-La is not super sweet.
No.
Let's not go back.
You can go there, and it's a little easier. So this supply plane radioed them to let them know they had a filmmaker who planned to make a documentary about life, death, the natives, and the rescue effort. They, as he's preparing to jump, Walter commented to the plane, has this guy ever made a jump before? He hasn't. And he learned that a fellow first recon paratrooper back in Hollandia had given him a half-hour verbal basics in avoiding certain deaths. Okay. And Walter's response was, for Christ's sake, tie a rope to his ripcord, because at least if the guy freezes in midair, the chute would open, and he wouldn't certainly die. He did not do well on the fall, and he manages to land spread eagle on his back in a clump of tall briar bushes some distance from base camp. And mind you, they had to do several loops of the plane because he was, like, freaking out. They're like, is he dead or wounded? And they reach him, and Sergeant Pavanio calls to Walter, Captain, sir, this man is drunk. And my favorite phrase, drunker than a hoot owl, was told about.
That's a new one.
Yeah. So this is Alexander Can, a 42-year-old adventurer who basically found his way here he's a scam artist, and I suggest reading the book because that guy's story is insane. But just for brevity's sake, he was in Australia when he heard about this, and he's like, I'll go over there and make a movie about it. So then they're back at Hollandia. They're trying to figure out how to get them out. And Ellsworth goes to Henry E. Palmer to figure out what kind of planes you can get there. Well, Palmer comes up with this idea. They were talking about, like, a Sentinel aircraft, which is meant to land on tightly designed rough trains. And he goes, I got a better idea, and it won't cost any fuel. So he goes into the headquarters, and he's like, okay, let's use glider planes. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So glider planes get towed along behind an aircraft, and when they're in the air, they can be attached, and you can release them, and they go down, and you can pick them back up. So they need a snatch pilot, and they need someone to pilot the glider.
Oh, wait a minute. They're going to drop a glider, and then they're going to pick this glider up?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
I know. It sounds crazy. So they get Major William Samuels, who's an experienced glider pilot, snatch pilot and all of that. And Palmer is like, I'll fly the glider. I'll pilot the glider. So, and remember, they're on an air base, so there's plenty of pilots around. So Samuel he named his plane Louise. He renamed it Leaking Louise because it had a tendency to spray engine oil all over its wings. So it sounds great. And Palmer eventually dubbed his Waco glider Fanless Faggot.
What?
Not a slur, but for its missing motor and its resemblance to a bundle of sticks.
Okay.
Yes, I know. And if I use that reference to it now, that is just the name of the plane. Don't be mad at me. So Ellsworth would supervise the mission from the cockpit of his own B-52 bomber, which he had named after his 17-year-old son, Ray Jr., and he would have on there enough reporters for a media circus.
So why?
Because they have built this all up. They're like, it's now like in the news constantly.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? What's happening with this? How are the survivors? So they had a couple weeks of training because, it's an art to picking up a glider, and you have to make sure everyone, and it's not an easy area to do it. So they wanted to practice it on at first an easy area, then move to harder areas. And eventually, we just got to do this.
Yeah, this plan is crazy.
Yeah. So Walter and the Colonel are going back and forth, and Ellsworth was like, okay, the first trip should be Walter, Mac, Maggie, and Decker. So all the survivors and Walter, the head of the rescue mission. And Walter's like, no, I'm going to be the last one out with my men. So we're going to put some other people with him, which is a real change to his character because he wanted that glory, but now he's like, no, I just want these people to get out safe.
That's the whole point.
So they drop, the Fanless Faggot comes on board to Shangri-La, gliding at the end of a tow cable. And Ellsworth's updating the people on the ground, how it's going and that. And the glider lands, really well, doesn't, crash or anything.
That's a plus.
That's a plus. They put out, nylon, they use red parachute, that outlined the makeshift landing strip, and they have to, turn it around, and they only have half an hour turnaround because the plane that's going to pick them up only has so much fuel. And Maggie is so upset to leave. She can't say bye to people.
Who cares?
Well, at this point, they've now been in the base camp for another couple of weeks. So they've made friends with, they have been doing training and all of that. Also, none of the survivors have packed. They're packing. The natives are doing a crying ceremony for them.
Oh boy.
And then at 9:47 a.m., they're in the glider. The steel hook catches the loop. Samuel slammed the throttles forward to gain power as he pulled back on the control to gain altitude. Inside the glider, the passengers and crew felt a neck-snapping jolt, and it begins to take off. They drag the glider to a dangerous 105 miles per hour. This is making it flying barely above the speed, which the C-47 was doomed to stall, and making everything fatal. So, on top of that, because, can't get any worse, the fanless faggot caught one of the parachutes laid down on the center field. So it's underneath the air belly, and it's making more drag. So,
can you imagine coming this far and then dying in the rescue mission?
No. Oh, it gets better. So inside, the 5 passengers are just like, oh, yay, like the tow rope didn't break. And then they heard persistent slap, slap, slap noise from underneath the glider, aka the parachute. And whipping against the glider's belly, the chute tore open the canvas-covered floor, adding added damage caused by sweeping through tree branches. They're strapped into their seats, and they look back, and there's just, open floor.
Oh, my God.
So the chute keeps whacking at it, and it's canvas, so it keeps shredding. Margaret is like, oh, crap. McCall, again, our hero, swallows everything that has happened to him, unbuckles his seat, gets to his knees, he crawls towards the tail of the glider, fighting the wind, hanging on to keeping from plummeting to his death. He reaches through the hole and grabs a handful of the parachute cup. He pulls it inside, basically pulls the chute in, and the rest of the trip, 90-minute trip, was uneventful, and,
What the fuck?
I know. Uneventful minus the fact they don't have a... So as soon as they get back, they are met with a pack of general VIPs, reporters, waiting for them, doing it, and it took them 7 weeks since they took off. And you can see pictures of the crews posing. They all survived. Everyone else got out. They took another glider back, and, they all survived the war. The war ends in August. So, and it's just, this crazy story you've never heard about.
No, I've never. I mean, this could be a movie and should be.
And I will say the best part, which just for time's sake, I didn't include, the survivors, he goes back and interviews them and follows them through the rest of their lives.
Oh, really?
And they met up. The guys would meet up, and they would had this unofficial club. It's insane. Walters and McCollum and Decker would still meet up even after Maggie passed. It's crazy.
That was a very intense story. I bit my nails to the point where they're gone. I'm serious.
Yeah, it's intense, but you don't hear about it a lot.
And no Nazis.
No Nazis! Thank you for coming on.
Check out the Murderific True Crime Podcast, hosted by Bernadette from the state of Maine. Topics will include some seriously true scary stories about serial killers, mass murderers, familicides, the missing, and unsolved cases. Go to www.murderific.com to start listening now, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Until then, we will be executing podcasts one crime at a time.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Rochelle.
And we're the hosts of Nature vs. Narcissism,
a true crime podcast mixed with some dark humor.
Sometimes we have alcohol.
Sometimes we have guests.
Sacramento, California.
Canton, Michigan.
Green River,
Honolulu, Hawaii.
Omaha, Nebraska.
Niagara, North Dakota.
Gloucester, United Kingdom. Dakota County, Wyoming.
Epizoyucan, Hidalgo, Mexico.
Flint, Michigan.
Boston, Massachusetts.
Phoenix, Arizona.
Woodruff, South Carolina.
Edmonton, York.
Hudson Valley, New York.
In Season 2, we will examine notorious killers in cities across the globe from A to Z.
We'll delve into their criminal history as well as their upbringing to try to determine why these killers commit these violent acts.
Was it nature?
Was it nurture?
Or was it plain old narcissism?
Find us on your favorite podcast streaming service.
Or visit murder.ly.
Of Domesticity. We're available on all podcatchers. Remember to rate, review, subscribe to help spread the word, or just force other people to listen to it. Our Facebook and Twitter are at Domestic Podcasts, and our Instagram is at the Cult of Domesticity. We also have podcast merch at Threadless. As well, if you want to support us financially or show some appreciation, we have a PayPal tip jar and a Patreon, which has some pretty great perks. Any topic suggestions, feel free to email us at domesticpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to stay domestic and cult free.